Hey guys, welcome back to another week of Life's Worth Living podcast. I'm your host, John Gossett, and we're so grateful for you to be back for another week. We want to give a shout out to our sponsor, GTM Builders, for allowing us to record in their beautiful model home here in Overlake. If you're in the market thinking about building a home, reach out to GTM Builders at gtmbuilders.com or visit one of their 4 model homes in the Twila Valley. Tonight's episode is brought to you by A. Warner Homes Real Estate. Interest rates are super low right now, and if you're thinking about buying or selling, reach out to A. Warner Homes Real Estate. You can reach them at 801-867-5078. Give them a call and let them know what you're looking for, and they will find you the perfect house. They are offering a special right now. If you're a veteran or a first responder, they will pay for your appraisal and your home inspection. So let them know that you heard it here on the podcast. So I wanted to start out tonight and tell you a little interesting tidbit that we found out this week, and I'm super grateful for the knowledge of this, that, we've been talking as we've gone through COVID, some of the things that have been going on with COVID. I mentioned on the podcast before that I think it was the 1st of July that in California they had an article that came out that said in the previous 4 weeks they had more suicide attempts than in their previous year. So in the neighborhood of 12 times what they have seen in the past. And I've really been curious as to what Utah's numbers were coming in at this year going through COVID. And we did get the numbers back from the state coroner's office, and we are holding steady. We have not seen an increase with COVID, and that's a blessing to the state of Utah, and I think says a lot about what we are doing here. So I just wanted to pass that on to everyone. And again, I want to thank everybody over the last month or so, and I haven't brought it up on any of the podcasts, but I have had so many messages that have come in thanking me for putting this podcast together, having these guests on, and getting to hear what episodes have moved people and have touched people. And I am really grateful for your comments and for the nice notes and texts and voicemails that you've left. And I appreciate that, because we do try to make sure that we're bringing a variety of topics, variety of circumstances, that, it's not a one size fits all. And so we're grateful for you coming back week after week and listening to what we have to say. And I know you come every week because of the guests that we have. And tonight, I'm super excited to have a friend of mine, Lark Galley. She's driven out from Salt Lake, and she's going to spend an hour with me tonight and tell her story. And so thanks for coming.
Sure. My pleasure. Thank you.
And, what did you think of Twila?
I was surprised. There's a lot of growth out here.
It's booming. It's booming. So, no, I really appreciate you coming out tonight. So I've heard some of the other podcasts you've done. You've done quite a few. A lot of people will read an intro and tell about yourself. I kind of want to hear it from you. I'm not going to rattle off your bio. I just kind of want to hear your story. Back up and tell us about your family that you grew up with, and, a little bit about your life through high school and college, and then we'll just kind of move on.
All right. So I was born in Utah, and then at the age of 6, my father moved us to Tennessee. And he just had this wandering feet, so to speak, right? And he wanted to always adventurous, finding new things. It wasn't until he was in his early 50s that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And looking back, I can now see the signs that, we didn't understand what the signs were, because there would be highs and there would be lows. I went to a different school every year of my life.
Wow.
Because my father was always, chasing the next thing, just where's the adventure, what can we do? And as a child, I never looked at it as instability or as a drawback. My father always painted it as an adventure. So that's the way I grew up, thinking my life was an adventure. But as a parent, I made a conscientious decision to stay in the same home
Yeah.
We've been there for 22 years now, stay in the same home where our kids grew up so that they could have some stability that I did not have. And I will admit it's been a little bit hard for me because, occasionally I get that wanderlust or let's go do the adventure, and my husband would be like, no. So just growing up all around the United States, I lived in 6 different states. I even did a foreign exchange in Sweden as a junior in high school. And just part of it, my father's, undiagnosed sickness. We didn't have a lot of money. Even though he had his master's degree, it was he wasn't chasing the money. It was just these crazy, crazy adventures that we would go on and do different things, and just moved all around. I came back as a teenager to go to high school in Utah, and just a lot of family here, so I didn't grow up around my cousins and aunts and uncles. And that was intentional on my father's part. He wanted us completely far away from everybody as possible, just different way he thought about things. I ended up going to the University of Utah.
Nice.
And then I served an LDS mission in Sweden, which I had gone where I'd lived as an exchange student. So it was like going home. I already spoke Swedish. I had friends there. I loved the food. It didn't feel like I was going to a foreign country.
You listened to ABBA.
Yeah, I listened to ABBA before I went on exchange. Yes, ABBA, yep. And then I came back and I did my master's degree at the University of Utah in economics. I got married, and then what is very ironic is I decided that Utah was just way too conservative for me, and I needed to move out of the state. So my husband and I moved to the Bay Area.
Oh, beautiful. We
were there for 4 years, but it's one of those things where I went from the most conservative place on the planet to
polar opposite.
Yes, to the most liberal place. And after a while, it was like, I got to go back to Utah, just because it was very liberal. But during the time that I lived in the Bay Area, after 3 years of infertility and trying to get pregnant, I finally got pregnant. And I was very excited. And I said to my husband, finally, we're going to be parents. And, if you've tried that long to get pregnant, you have a certain idea of what your spouse is going to say. And my husband did not say what I thought he was going to say. He said, well, I don't want to be a father, and I don't want to be married to you.
Ouch.
No clue that no, you don't see it, right?
No.
And I found out 2 years later that he had another person, he had another child, just this whole thing. And you hear like the spouse is always the last to know. Well, this is true because you have a certain trust, right? Yeah. And he basically walked out. And I saw him once when our daughter was 2 months old, and she's now 24. Haven't seen him since, right?
Wow.
He left the country. I mean, he was gone. In retrospect, it was probably the best thing for our family because of what then happened. I moved back to Utah because I didn't want to do the single parent thing. I made my mom and stepfather move in with me because I didn't want to be alone with my daughter. I was working, and unbeknownst to me during that time, my current husband had moved from New Orleans. He was married, had been married for a few years, but she was from Utah. She came back to Utah. He left his home. He rented out his home, quit his job, got a job up here to try to work out that marriage, which it didn't work out. And we ended up meeting after he'd been in Utah for a couple years, and we got married when my daughter was 14 months old. So she's the only father that she's ever known. He's been there. After a year of marriage, then legally he could adopt her, which he did, and you would never know that they were just like that. And so despite a lot of the grief, it took me already I had gone through a lot of grief with the infertility.
Yeah.
And then going through this divorce that I didn't understand because my husband just left. He wouldn't talk to me, he just left. And then to see God's hand in my life where I moved from San Francisco back to Salt Lake area. My current husband, moved from New Orleans to Utah. We lived within 2 miles of each other.
Wow.
And we were set up by God is how I say it. Yeah.
For sure.
And I know that despite hard things that happen, the good is there too.
Yeah. That's amazing. That is
Yes.
amazing.
Yes.
Well, and things work out the way they're supposed to, right?
It doesn't always feel like
No,
it's
it
supposed to a
doesn't.
certain way at times,
Yeah.
And I will tell you that it was in a very dark place. You can imagine I'm living in the Bay Area. I'm working. I have no family around. I don't know what's going on with my husband because he's moved away, but I'm thinking he's going to come back. I don't know what's going on. So I don't tell anybody really what's happening. Wow. And I was in a dark place, and I would say that I was suicidal at the time. What saved me was my daughter that I was pregnant with. Mm-hmm. And so I look at the tender mercies.
Yeah, what a blessing. Mm-hmm. What a blessing. So you moved back to Utah. Mm-hmm. And you start a family here.
Yes.
With your second husband.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your husband.
So he is from New Orleans, like I said, born in the city in New Orleans, but lived right outside on the other side of the bridge. So literally he's, 10 mm-hmm. miles on the other side of the bridge. Totally different culture. He joined the LDS church when he was an adult. After he moved back to Utah, his first wife was an inactive member of the church. And so once again, you look at how God sets things up, right? Yeah. And so he was born and raised Catholic, went to Catholic schools his whole life, and just really very focused on the family. That was so important to him, is the family. And so when he and his first wife were married, he said, we're going to church, Catholic church, Mormon church, doesn't matter, we're going to church. So it was kind of funny that they would go to church every Sunday, and he would just go because you go to church.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Yeah.
So how many years have you been married?
I have to always think in my head. We have been married just past 23 years this last August.
Awesome.
And I kind of joke about it, we both had to have spouses who left us mm-hmm. so that we could get a little bit of dose of humility and be kinder to each other. Both very A-type personalities. My husband was in the Guard, uh-huh. the Army Guard for 35 years. He just retired last year as a lieutenant colonel.
How cool
and he
is
had
that?
some pretty high duties within the military. And so, you can imagine the personality types that go on. And yet, once again, I see God's hand in our lives. And truly, we have needed each other from dealing with what we've had to go through for this past year and a half.
Well, I bet. I'll bet. Well, that's amazing. That is amazing. So I know that you have a background in business. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what you've done as an adult.
Sure. So I did international global logistics. So that's what I was working on both in Salt Lake as well as in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. I worked with some very, very large companies, global companies, traveled around the world and would help them with their international shipping logistics, whether it's ocean, air, warehousing, fulfillment, trucking, all of that. And it was very exciting, and I enjoyed it because every day was different situation, scenario, dealing with customs or different products. So it was quite thrilling for me.
That's cool.
And then I was working in Salt Lake, and as my kids were getting older, becoming teens and preteens, I'm realizing that I'm not spending a lot of time with them. And so I really want to kind of break away from the corporate world, because the corporate world, they owned me. And I can remember when my son was 4 months old, they said, you need to get on a plane and go to Malaysia. My son is 4 months old.
Wow.
And that was hard. And I got on the plane and I went to Malaysia. But as they kept getting older, it didn't coincide with where I wanted to end up with my children and the relationships that I wanted. So back in 2011, I actually walked away from a corporate job, which, they never thought I would do it when you're walking away from multiple six figures, right? But I was dedicated, and it was really important to me. So I did contract work kind of in the same arena, but I set my hours, and I didn't have to work as long, so I could spend more time, specifically before school and then after school when the kids got home. And when the kids were younger, I had live-in nannies. That's kind of how I functioned as a corporate executive, right? That I had live-in nannies to take care of the kids when they were little. And as my daughter, who was 15 at the time when I quit, she was the oldest child in the home. I said, so what do you think of Mom's being at, not working full time? Oh, well, at corporate. And she said, well, before you were never here, and now you're always here. And I'm like, is that a good thing? And she's like, meh. Because you've heard the statistics, the time that the kids get in trouble the most are between 3 and 5, right? And as my daughter is turning into that 14, 15 years, I knew I needed to be there more. And so that was very gratifying to spend more time. And I did that for a few years. And then in January 2014, my father died. And he owned a small trucking company, which then I inherited, logistics, right? I was pretty familiar with that. What I told people at the time was that he was in a car accident and died from that. But that's not what killed him. That was just what kind of started a chain reaction of events. He had just a few months earlier had knee surgery, so he wasn't sleeping. He was in pain. He had finally gotten help with his bipolarity, and he had been on some medication, but they had changed that medication too, and they hadn't got the dose right. And so we think he dozed off and kind of drifted off the freeway, ran into the back of a snowplow. It was January. Had an accident, and the airbag released. The person who was working around the snowplow was parked. He came running over and saw my dad there, and he reported to the police that my dad was shouting at him, "Go away, go away!" And my dad had pulled out a gun, which, my dad had guns. He was not mentally stable, so legally he should not have had guns. But of course, people lie about their mental state all the time. So he had a gun, and he pulled it out, and the worker saw it and kind of ran off, and then he heard the gunshot. And ironically, at that same time, shortly thereafter, I was driving north on I-15, and I happened to look over at the freeway, and I saw this long line of cars, backed up, trying to get off at the exit, and the ambulance and all of that. Finding out 15 minutes later that was my father.
Wow.
That was there, right? And he had been taken, he wasn't dead, but he was not responding. They put him on life support, took him to IMC Medical in Murray, and my brother-in-law called me, and he said, "Your father's here. We need you to come down to the hospital. You have his power of attorney, medical power of attorney," which, my parents had been divorced at that time for like 24 years plus, right?
Gotcha.
And he wasn't married, and so for some reason he thought, I'm the oldest child, to put me on it, never telling me that he was planning to do that, which is always a shock, right?
Yeah.
And
so that was the day you found out.
That was the day I found out, is the day he needed it done.
Wow.
And so I went down to the hospital, and the doctor talked to us, me and my siblings that were there, and I'm the oldest of 7, and so the 5 of us in the relatively close area came trickling in throughout the next couple hours, and one is out of state and the other one is down in St. George, so they couldn't get there fast enough. Mm-hmm. And the doctor's telling us that the gunshot wound was such that right now he can't support himself. He is on life support, and even if we take off the life support and he lives, he'll always be a vegetable. And my father had a lot of discussions with me about not ever wanting to lose his mind. His mother had Alzheimer's, and he was deathly afraid of losing his mind or being a vegetable or anything like that. He actually had DNR tattooed on his chest. Do not resuscitate.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it didn't work because they still resuscitated him, right? Because you can't make any money off a dead person. But it just shows you, like, his mind, it wasn't quite there, right?
Yeah.
So I knew that he did not want to be kept on life support. That was not his wishes. And having medical power of attorney, I was one that had to make that decision. And all the kids, they looked at me. We're all adults at this point.
Yeah.
The youngest was 44, in her early 40s, so it's not like we're young. And they're looking at me to make that decision. And I am very matter-of-fact about things, and I found this out even more so years later with my son, just take all those emotions and you just put them away and you put them in a box and you deal with them later, because right now we just have to take care of this situation with the life support. And I think of a couple of my sisters were sobbing. They would not have been able to make that decision.
Yeah.
And I just matter of factly said, I know Dad would want this, and so that's what we're going to do. And I think I had to be the one to say that because the others could not have said that.
Yeah. You were the leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did that affect you after?
I was mad. I was very angry. I was angry that he had put me in that position, especially not telling me.
Yeah.
The other siblings then decided that I would be the executor of the estate, which there wasn't much really, but having to work through all of the affairs that you have to go through. He didn't leave a lot in order, right? There was no will. And so it was difficult. A lot of people say things about, when somebody dies and a parent dies and the siblings, there are siblings, we have siblings in our family, they don't talk to each other anymore. And that's been hard, and some feelings and emotions came out because I think it was left in such a difficult way.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned earlier, I couldn't really say he died by suicide. I think some of my best friends didn't know how he really died. I just couldn't talk about it. I thought the stigma and the shame and all of that. This is January 2014. And so you look now at 2020, and I feel like our society has come a long way.
We have.
And the thing that really I remember, this was the hardest part of dealing with my dad's suicide, is when I had to go to the place where they had his vehicle, which was totaled by the insurance company, and I had to just go get his personal effects out. And I had to go in and get these files and some of his things from his vehicle that had gray matter splattered all over the vehicle and his files. And that's when I had my breakdown. And it was a couple weeks after he had passed.
Wow.
And I thought, what parent puts their child through this situation? And that was a very traumatic day for me. I was very angry. And it took a long time for me to really understand, the pain that my father must have been in to come to that point where he just was in such a dark place that he ended his life. What I didn't know at the time is that because a family member had taken their life by suicide, now the rest of my family, their chances of suicide just increased by 50%.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And I talked to my kids. They were in their teenage years at their time. The youngest, I think, was about 14 or 15. I felt they needed to know because they were going to find out from cousins, or it was going to come out. So we talked about it, and they were upset. They were very sad. But it was just one of these things where I just said, this is what happened, and we can't change it.
So you talked about the stigma and why we don't talk about it. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think that we feel that? Because your story is kind of a common story.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a death, it's by suicide, and there is a want to not go there with people.
Right.
And why is that?
I think it has to do with just the shame around the whole thing. Because I remember thinking, what will other people think about me if they know my father has died by suicide? What does that mean if he's crazy? Does that mean that I'm crazy? Or my siblings are crazy? Or will I be tainted in some way? How will society look at me?
Yeah.
That's honestly what I was thinking. And the shame. I felt so much shame.
Do you think some of it was to protect him?
Not so much, because I was pretty angry with him. I was really angry with him.
Well, and I can see that. Mm-hmm. I could see that you would feel that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take on.
And, being the oldest and then having the 6 siblings and seeing the fallout after his death and like the arguing and just the deterioration of relationships and seeing how his death affected them in different ways.
Yeah.
And that was hard too. That was very difficult. I don't think he had any idea what his actions were going how that would affect his children. I don't think he would have chosen that if he had known.
Well, it sounds like it was kind of an instant decision on his
Yes.
part, caused by the unintentional accident.
Yes, but I think it was just the last straw. He had been talking about suicide for 10 years.
Oh, he had.
Yes, and he lived in my mother-in-law basement apartment, and my greatest fear was that my children were going to find him in the apartment with a bullet in his head. I lived in that fear. Because what could be worse than an adult finding him as, a small child.
Yeah.
And he had talked about it for so long, and he had gotten help on and off, but he was just so volatile.
Yeah. So 2014, and unfortunately that wasn't your last suicide within your family.
So 18 months as of yesterday was the 18-month mark of my 19-year-old son's suicide.
And I am so sorry for your loss.
Thank you. It was hard, because what happened, he was 19. He was a freshman at the University of Utah. He was in the engineering program. He had wanted to go into that since he was 6 years old. He was a brilliant mind. He knew so many things, that even his mom and dad didn't have a clue about. He had friends. He had hobbies. He was doing things, excited about life, and we didn't know he was struggling at that time. What had happened just a little over 3 years prior, when he was going into his sophomore year in high school, as he's starting school, my husband's having this talk with him, the parental talk, and that talk goes something along the lines of, okay, now you're a sophomore, you need to take your schooling seriously. If you want to get into the engineering program, you need to do this and this and this, no more messing around, and keep in mind my husband is in the military. He can be pretty intense. And as he's talking to my son, and they're sitting out on the front porch, he could see that my son was detaching. My son's name is Christian. He could see he was detaching, and my husband's had suicide training in the military. Yeah. And he just saw these signs, and he looked at my son and he said, "Are you feeling suicidal?" My son was 15 at the time, not quite 16. And Christian said, "Yes, I am," which was good that he answered that way, right? And so my husband came inside and said, "Christian says he's feeling suicidal. Will you be with him for a few minutes? I'm going to go call the military suicide hotline, and I'm going to get an appointment for him," which he did. He got an appointment with the therapist the next day. And as a mom, yes, I'd been in dark places on and off, but I'd never truly come up with a plan. So while I didn't completely discount what he was saying, my mind just didn't connect the dots. Like, he says he's feeling suicidal, but would you really follow through? Even with my father having died by suicide, I still didn't consider it a reality. And I said, "Okay, son, tell me how you're feeling, what's going on, et cetera, right?" And a couple things, I think. First of all, is that I think he was feeling a lot of pressure from Dad, to perform, to do certain things, to step up to the plate and just do all the things we want our children to do, right?
Yeah.
And that's a fine line as a parent. How do you know how to push your child enough that they'll overcome, this lethargy, where they don't want to do anything, or they don't do as much, live up to the potential that that they can do? But at what point have you pushed too far and it's just too much and they just feel so much pressure? And I think even more now with younger kids, we have kids that are suicidal at 9 years old.
Yeah.
They say it's a different world, and it really is a different world. We cannot parent the way our parents parented us.
No.
And it's a hard lesson to learn. And so the next day I took my son to a therapist. He was in there for about an hour, and then she called me in and she said, Christian, do you want to tell your mom or should I? And he said, no, I'll tell her. I mean, he was a very outspoken, strong young man, which is why this surprised me that he felt he had to have a therapist or another person in the room to feel safe for what he was about to tell me. He said, Mom, I don't believe in God. I believe in science. And he's looking at me, and I can tell he's waiting for me to become angry and just rage at him. And I just said, okay, son, well, I believe God is science, but, if that's not what you believe, then you run with that. That's your decision. I can't make you believe anything. And I think he just felt so much pressure to conform to a certain belief system, and yet he was afraid to tell us otherwise. And I look back on that, and I feel regret that somehow in our family, we're a very vocal family, that we did not express that it's okay for you to have other opinions than what your parents have. And like I said, I was surprised that he didn't feel safe saying that, but apparently, that was a fear and a concern for him. And, as we look at our very different society in Utah, being, majority of the people belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not so much now, but I think in years past, once again, that shame, if your child doesn't conform, if your child doesn't do certain things, then the parents take on this shame.
Yeah.
And since then, I've come to realize that's not what our children need. I would want to create a space that if my child, if he had come to me and, he says, I don't believe in God, or what if he'd said, I'm coming out of the closet, I'm gay. What if he had said, Mom, I got the girl down the street pregnant? Today, the way I would handle those situations are very different from before. Because as a parent, you're thinking, oh, what is my neighbor going to think about me? It doesn't matter about the neighbor.
No.
Your job is to love and guide the children. You're not even their savior. I thought I was my kid's savior for so long. And 18 months ago when my son died by suicide, I realized I am not their savior. I cannot save them. I can love them and I can guide them. And that's my only job.
Yeah. Takes a big weight off his shoulders, too.
It was a huge weight off my shoulders.
Yeah. And in Utah, and it may be this way everywhere, but in Utah, we kind of have this whole timeline laid out. This happens by this date, this age, boom, 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 boom. And it's like climbing a ladder. You just one step at a time. You're going to hit this, this, and this. So if you miss one of those steps or you decide that that's not the route you want to go, there is a lot of pressure.
There is. And I look at it especially like this year with COVID. Who in the world can stay on that ladder this year, right?
Yeah.
Your timeline, you are messed up. And if you have to do certain things in a certain way, okay, then what does that mean? That you're all going to hell, because you didn't do things a certain way, because you couldn't?
Yeah. And let's face it, everybody can take their own route.
Exactly.
And that route can be as individual as the person. And I think we're getting better.
I agree.
But we've got a ways to go.
We do. We are getting better, thankfully, because more people have been willing to come out.
Yeah.
And so my son went to the therapist for a couple months, and then he said, Mom, I'm good. I got this. We're fine. And he had told the therapist about how he had a plan to kill himself, and it was all mapped out. And I was horrified. I'm like, you've got a plan? Like, what?
We put some thought into it.
Yeah, exactly. This is not just a spur of the moment, I'm upset with Dad.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I respected him. He was 16 at the time, and he pretty much knew his own mind, what he wanted. I'm like, okay. And then he went on for 3.5 years. And he finished high school, he was in college, he was doing all these things. Never any kind of relapse, we never would have thought, oh yeah, there goes a kid that's got a problem.
Yeah.
Even I talked to his homeroom teacher in high school afterwards that came to the viewing. He told me, he sees a lot of kids and he can tell the ones that really struggle at home. And he said, I never got that feeling from your son. So at least that helped me know that there wasn't this huge red flag that I was sweeping under the table or I wasn't paying attention to. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and we got to give props to your husband because he did pick up on it that day.
Yes.
And that's a tough thing. I think that's a challenge we have with teenagers because so many of the signs are the same signs of just being a teenager.
Yes.
Surly. Where do you break that off and you say, okay, because you go down the list of things and so many of them describe teens. Mm-hmm. Impulsive, moody. Mm-hmm. You just go down that list and you're going, that describes like 99% of teens. And so for your husband to pick up on that, that's a big deal.
We almost look at it like, because of that situation, we got 3.5 years with our son.
Yeah.
I think that might have been his path, honestly. It might have been his path. And people might think that's weird, but we all have a path and a journey and something we have to do, right? But I really do think that his path was to help me become more Christian-like. I think of a son named Christian who didn't believe in God, who was put in this path to help his mother become more Christ-like. And I just feel like he helped me because our relationship was one where we fought our whole life. He was alpha male. He knew better than mom. Mom didn't know anything. And he argued with me. Like when he was 6 years old, he could argue with me about things, and he would usually be right and I was wrong. And I'm like, son, just do it. I just need it done. And so that can be frustrating as an adult, and it just continued. And my regret is that I did not try to repair that relationship at a younger age. I always thought, it'll get better in the future. It'll get better. It'll get better when he moves out of the house, right? And then we can have a relationship where we're not always at each other's throats. That's what I regret. And so as a parent, I would say, don't put things off. Repair it. Show them love, concern. What are they interested in? Be interested in what they're interested in.
Yeah. And that's a tough thing, too, because each of your kids come hardwired so different. Mm-hmm. They're not. Even though they, they're
in the same family.
Yeah, but they all have their own individuality, and they're so different. Mm-hmm. I have 4 kids, and they're different, each one.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to, and I can see how you would say, let it go. He's going to outgrow it or whatever. I can see that thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how you would really just,
Well, he was just so frustrating for me. Our personalities, like he was such a sweet boy for everybody else, dad's best friend. Mm-hmm. But with his mom, and maybe that's the way it is in life. You have one person that he can just push my button like nobody else. And so when he did pass away, he shot himself. And if it hadn't been a gun, it would have been 100 of other ways he could have come up with anything. I was once again very angry with him. I couldn't cry for a week because our relationship was such that it was getting a little bit better, but it was still very much that we wrote each other notes when we wanted things. We lived in the same house, and he would be like, Mom, we need more milk, or Christian, I need you to tidy this up. We found that that's maybe the best way to communicate with each other so that it didn't escalate.
Yeah.
And as much as I tried to love him and hug him and all of this, there was just so much emotion there. And it wasn't until a week after his death that I saw a picture of him when he was my little boy. And that's when I broke down and sobbed. Because I was angry with the man, but I loved the little boy.
Yeah, that's such a tough thing. So, if you could go back, I know it's not possible, but if you could go back to the little boy, what would you have done differently?
unconditional love. And we say that, but we don't understand really what that
We
means.
don't.
And what that means is that what they do is different from who they are. Mm-hmm. And just love them. Yeah. Just love them no matter what. And show them support and show up for them.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And, you know, we all think we understand unconditional love, but we live in a world full of conditions. Mm-hmm. I mean, we really do. I mean, you tell me something that doesn't come with a condition, you know, and so that's really tough to do, especially when you kind of have, I think with our kids, we want our kids to go farther than we did, you know, be able to live their dreams. And as parents, I think we're guilty of having dreams for our kids, yes. You know, that we want this for this kid and this mm-hmm. for that kid. And so, yeah, it's a tough deal to allow that journey to go whatever way they mm-hmm. want it to go.
So I look at now, you know, before when a child would come home and maybe they weren't wearing what I thought they should wear, or, you know, as my older daughter says, my favorite phrase during that time period was, "That's not appropriate." It didn't matter what it was. It's like, that's not appropriate. And, you know, certain standards, you know, of what we were, and very vocal about expressing when the kids did not meet those standards in any way. And now my girls come over and it's kind of like, you just shut your mouth, you know, and I don't need to express disapproval about whatever it is they're doing. Mm-hmm. And that can be hard, but now it's just like, nope, not my business.
Yeah. It's funny because we do come a long way as we get older. Mm-hmm. I always think, boy, if I could have waited to have been a dad till I was in my 40s, how much better I would have been than in my 20s. Because in my 20s, I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, that's why grandparents are so nice, right? Because you're like, don't get caught up in all the minutia. It's just minutia, you know? Just love them.
Yeah. And I'll do that even with my own kids. They'll come over with the grandkids and get upset over something that's just silly. And I'll think, yep, that was me. It was me.
It was. Because you feel this intensity. You know, mm-hmm. they've got to meet a certain standard, or we've got to do a certain thing, or what will so-and-so think if they see my child running around with, you know, a dirty shirt on or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, just let it go.
You know, and life is a journey. Mm-hmm. And we're all still learning, and we're not perfect, and we have so much to learn. So a year and a half ago, life's turned upside down. How has that changed your family dynamics?
It's been hard, right? So once again, when my son died, I felt the same feelings as when my father died. The shame, the stigma. I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to just stay in my home and curl up in a ball and just disappear, mm-hmm. just die. And when my father died, I actually went through like 5 months of a dark hole. I don't remember those 5 months. It was like I was walking around just not there.
Yeah.
And I felt myself start to slip into that hole again. And at the same time, I'm looking at my husband, who we'd been married 21 years at the time, 22 almost. And I had seen him cry twice during those whole time. Military man, right? Mm-hmm. And one of those 2 times was at his mom's funeral. Yeah. He cried for 3 days.
I can imagine.
He could barely function. He lost 15 pounds in a week. He stopped eating. And we had to change the code on the safe to put all the guns away. At least he was aware enough to know that it was not a safe. He was not at a place where he needed access to the guns.
Yeah.
And the girls, very just crying, a lot of regrets and sadness. The younger daughter wouldn't even talk about it. She was angry. She was so upset. She was so close to her brother. And just over the next couple weeks, I could see that I didn't have the luxury of disappearing into that dark place because my family needed me. Yeah. And then I had moms, friends reach out to me who had children that were my son's same age. They knew him. And they told me about how concerned they were about their children already, the struggles that their kids have been going through, and now how they're concerned that my son's suicide might set them off because of that whole copycat suicide, right? Mm-hmm. And so within that weekend, I just kept thinking, this is not about me. This is not about whether I was a good parent or a bad parent. This is not about, we didn't see any of the signs. This is not about our son and this whatever he was struggling through. I can't change any of that. I would like to change it, but I don't live on a planet where I can change that. Yeah. What can I change? And I immediately thought, if I don't speak out and one of these children takes their lives, then that's on me. Mm-hmm. And that's suddenly what just flipped a switch in my life. And in less than a week of my son's passing, I started posting on social media. And if you had told me that I would talk about it openly, that I would talk about suicide awareness, suicide prevention, what is going on, let's get rid of the stigma, I would have said, no way. There is no chance I will ever do that. And here I am on this path. And as soon as I got that kind of that insight that, no, this is what you're doing for the rest of your life, it was like this mission. Like, I am called. I can't stop talking about it. Sometimes in the beginning, my husband and my children be like, stop talking about it. Do you have to talk to strangers? Do you have to talk to everybody? I'm like, yes, I do. Yeah. They have to hear this, because my thought was, if I can save one parent from going through the pain that my husband and I have been through, the loss, the devastation, then I have made a difference in this world.
Absolutely.
And that's all I could think about is, earlier, even when my son expressed that he was feeling suicidal, that's outside. That's the other high school that has those problems. That's not in my home. Even with my father's suicide, not in my home, right? My kids would never do that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I want to tell parents is absolutely, it is in your home and you don't even know about it.
And I think that's why we hear so many parents after they lose a child say, I didn't see any signs. Because it's not something that we want to talk about. It's and being in that work as well, my kids are tired of hearing about it, because every time I see something, a breakup or something, are you okay? Is everything all right? And they're annoyed with that being brought up over and over again. But how do you not? Once you're in that space, how do you not notice all the little things that maybe before we would have let breeze right by and not notice?
Right. And that's why it's so important, especially during this COVID time.
Yeah.
This time of when you can't reach out, you can't be physically present, and we need that.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like when you're empty and you're feeling suicidal, because you don't have the connection. And so, as you mentioned, I actually read that article that you were talking about, that you referenced from California, about that it had increased so much that I think it was in that 1 month in March, they had as many suicide attempts as the year before.
Yeah.
And that is what's going on.
And that's scary.
Yes.
I've said it over and over again on the podcast. I'm more scared of what we're going to find out after than I am about maybe getting the virus. I mean, I'm trying to be careful, but again, I think there's so many things going on. That's why I was so thrilled to hear those numbers in the state of Utah have remained the same, because I didn't know, and nobody was releasing the numbers, and I'm like, wow, what if we are so far, above what we've experienced in the past? And you don't want to see that. Any one suicide's too many. And so it's an interesting path that we find ourselves on now. You and me and so many other people that are working in this space. What can we do?
I have changed quite a bit in the last year and a half, and I would say that the grief has actually altered my person who I'm inside. Before, I was very task-oriented, just get it done, we'll deal with feelings later, we'll deal with the situation later. And now I'm more apt to slow down, to hug people, to look people in the eye. How are you feeling? No, tell me, really, how are you feeling? What's going on? What's going on with you? And to not miss opportunities that in the past I would have just blown by.
Yeah.
Because people matter. And what I have come to find out is that this life is just relationships. Yeah. 8 months after my son passed away, my husband and I were talking, and we, this whole time period, time doesn't always heal, right? And we have our ups and downs, and it gets difficult. And at 8 months, we were both just so struggling in our own ways, but we hadn't been talking to each other very much. And finally, we were able to have a real honest talk, and we were both feeling the same way. We both just wanted to go to a deserted island, to a shack, sit on the beach, and just disappear. Because even though we had both done a lot of phenomenal things in our life with our education and our career and doing all these different things that, that we made it in life, nothing mattered. We both felt like we had failed in every aspect of our lives. As spouses, as parents, what did it matter with whatever we'd done in life? It didn't matter. And being able to have that honest talk and to know that the other one was there for us to support us and help us, that's what's been getting us through, is to have somebody there to talk it through, because it has been difficult. I just finished writing a book that's coming out in November.
I have been watching that.
And that's been a struggle. There's been a lot of tears.
And tell us the name of the book.
So it's called Learning to Breathe Again.
Yeah.
Because there were times, especially in the early months, where it just felt so heavy. And like to even, to breathe, to remember to breathe, it felt so hard. And I feel like through going through some of these experiences, I just really talked to God, and I said, if you want me to do this and talk about this, I need this like heavy weight, this crushing weight on my chest. I need you to take it away, because I can't go out and talk to people when it's just crushing me. And I feel like I've been blessed to be able to do that because it's so important. This message that everyone matters, that you have value, that where you are in life is not the end. There's more. And you might be the person that saves somebody else down the road. And if you're not around, that other person is not going to make it, because you are an integral part of helping them down the road. And we're all connected. And so to come to this point in life and realize that stuff just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's kind of shocking, because we spend all our life trying to acquire stuff and then to find that it doesn't matter. That's been really eye-opening.
And the only things we take with us are the things that money can't buy.
Exactly.
Like you said, the relationships. And that's, again, back to the COVID thing. We crave connection. Mm-hmm. We crave being able to be a part of a community and to interact with one another. And you pull all that away and put us on Zoom, and man, it doesn't feel right.
No.
It doesn't feel the way that we need to feel. Mm-hmm. And that's the toughest thing. And so if you look at people that maybe were struggling before COVID, mm-hmm. and watch it amp up in them, that's why I'm so concerned with. And you talked about how it's changed you. Empathy is a weird thing, but when you're in this space, you're constantly paying attention to what others are feeling.
Yes.
I mean, I've always kind of been an empath. I've always felt what other people feel. And I grew up in a military family as well.
So you felt a lot.
My dad was not Mr. Emotion. It was, what you described. And every time I would have to get up and speak in front of somebody and I'd start to tear up, he'd say, "You're a Nichols, you're not a gossip," because that's not what gossips did, and used to drive him nuts. But I now realize I needed that. I needed to have that. I've had it my whole life, but I needed that in order to be in this space and do the things that I'm doing. And so, you know, you have to be able to feel. And sometimes that's a scary thing.
It is, you know, especially in our world. And I just know that through my adult life, I had built this shell around my heart so that I wouldn't feel, so I wouldn't get hurt. I mean, having gone through the divorce and, you know, abandonment by my spouse and just this shell had built up over the years. So I didn't want to feel.
Yeah.
And now suddenly I'm having to feel on a whole new level. And I also realize that I can't put that shell back if I want to do this work.
No, it doesn't work.
It doesn't. You know, you can't come across and tell people I care about you and have a shell around your heart when you do it, right? And so it's been different for me. It's been vulnerable and exposing myself, and that's another thing I was concerned about. You know, oh, what everybody going to say? You know, Lark's lost it. She's crazy, or you know, all this things. And honestly, nobody has ever said anything bad to me about what I'm doing or about my son or anything. And I feel that people realize this information needs to come out. They need to hear it. And as I talked about it, so many people came to me and expressed how they had struggled, how they might have attempted suicide years earlier. These are people that you look at successful that you would have never thought.
Isn't it interesting how it happens? And I've seen it as well. And you know, we'll do an event and have somebody come up to me and say, "Thank you for what you're doing," and lay it out there. And you're like, wow.
You never would have thought, right? It is more prevalent than we even know.
Yeah.
And so the people the ones that you think are immune, they're probably suffering the most.
Yeah.
Because they've just got a facade on. That's not really what's going on, but they're not going to let it down because they don't want the stigma. They don't want to be judged. And we just need to love each other. That's it.
And, you know, and I think that goes into so many different areas that, we just need to accept and love. You don't need to change your views. You don't need to change your opinions, but you need to recognize it's not your journey and just accept everybody for who they are. I think, you know, as teenagers, I think we kind of get it in our minds that, you know, you got to be the cool kid and you got to dress a certain way and you've got to hang out with the right people. And I see that even in people my age now, that they want to be friends with the people that are going to take them places and what are they going to get out of this relationship. And I've never been that guy where I just, you know, I like people because I like people, and I don't have a motive behind wishing that, but it's something that we've trained ourselves over the years, and it takes a while to untrain.
Right.
You know, it takes a while to say those things don't matter, and you know, as you come out of high school and you get older, it doesn't matter. You know, the cool kid thing or being popular doesn't necessarily matter, but the time that it takes to learn those things, it takes time to unlearn them.
Yeah. And as parents, hopefully we can help our children instill in them their value no matter what they do or what they have. That they still have value just because they exist. I was thinking when you were talking about the cool kids in high school, I went to this fundraising event that a foundation was doing to help with the suicide awareness, and they had a line of portraits of kids who had taken their lives. They were high school students for the most part. Every one of them, good-looking kids.
Yeah.
They had everything to live for. You could tell that, you know, that if you were their parent, you would have been proud of them. And so, like I said, it's the ones that you think don't have it all together and they're going somewhere. They're the ones that are afraid. What if I don't keep it all together? What if I lose my popularity? What if I don't have this? Or what if somebody doesn't accept me?
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are most vulnerable because they have so much dependence upon outside validation for who they are.
And I think so much of it has to do with us making that conversation with them, seeing how people are doing, and figuring out how you have those conversations to break it down. Hey, how are you doing? You know, or I've noticed this about you. Is everything okay? Some of those conversations are uncomfortable. I remember when first getting into suicide prevention, they'd say, well, you could just ask somebody, are you thinking about suicide? The first time I said that, it was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable. I don't know if you felt that same way, but that's a hard thing to ask somebody. Now, all these years into it, it doesn't faze me a bit. In fact, I found that I like to be very direct and kind of shock them, because then you can kind of, when you shock somebody, not a lot of people have that poker face, and you can read into what they're thinking by just throwing it out there. And the more direct you are with people, the more direct they'll be back to you. I found if you're wishy-washy, they'll answer wishy-washy. And so I think there's so much for us to learn. And I think during 2020, especially with what we've been going through, it's so important to always be watching and to see how people are feeling and how they're doing. And I think that's something that this may be a gift, because I think 2020 may encourage more of that type of conversation, because we are worried about each other.
And we've stripped away the things that we used to think mattered. And now we realize what really matters is being with your family, having those relationships, right? And the other thing, too, is maybe somebody's not suicidal, but to look at other people, and I've heard this said that every one of us are either coming out of a terrible situation, we're in a terrible situation, or we're about to go through a terrible situation. So if we can look at other people and just offer them grace and respect, and just allow them for whatever they're going through, and just treat them in the way that we might want to be treated.
And we've learned that our whole lives, right? Treat people the way you want to be treated. Why is that such a hard thing?
It's the pride, or I'm going to get mine. And I look at, older people, and I try to treat them the way I would want my parents or grandparents to be treated. And that's important to me.
And that's a community that I've been really worried about. It's our elderly population. This is a population that already feels like they're a burden because they're not able to do things that they once were able to do. They're more isolated now than ever. They're scared to go to the store. They're scared to go out. Ordering groceries in. They're in their house. They don't have people visiting because people are wanting to make sure they don't get them sick. And that's a population that I'm super concerned about right now, because how would that feel?
Right, to be isolated, or to feel like, oh, am I next? We have a lot of neighbors that are older, and we try to still go visit with them, even they're on their porch, or drop things off or call, because those are relationships. I think it's a rich relationship to have the diversity, to have especially the age diversity. Our kids grew up in the neighborhood with these people that are there, and they've known them all their lives. And it's, their grandparents aren't always around, but these older neighbors that they've developed these relationships, and it's a beautiful relationship. And we have a lot of older people in our neighborhood who they were devastated when Christian passed away. They've known him all their lives. And he, being from the South, my husband was always like, you call them Miss whatever, Miss Doreen or Mr. Norm or Miss Evelyn, Miss Tammy. It's never, you never call them by their first names. And so the kids grew up calling them that, and that's kind of special for them.
It is. So tell me, one thing that we see, and I'm happy that you've not been in this position, but it's a hard thing to go through a loss of a child, because the tension it puts on a marriage and relationships. And we talked a little bit about how it changed family dynamics. What advice could you give to couples that have lost a child to, how do we keep strong?
Right. Because, my husband and I, we had our ups and downs all through our marriage, let alone with losing a child. And I've heard different statistics. The one that I heard from the College of Nursing at the University of Utah, from the director there of the grief program, is 30% of marriages end in divorce from the loss of a child, however it is, right? And this is what I would say. It's like you have got to remove blame. Blame is off the table. I can't blame my son. I can't blame my spouse or my other children. I can't blame myself. And that's, as humans, we want to blame somebody, because if we can assign blame, then we can say, that's the reason this happened. Blame is off the table. Yeah. Because I caught myself doing that very early on. And we cannot blame. And that's a big thing. And just the other thing is I have to control my thoughts. Well, what if it had been different? What if he hadn't done that? And you start to spiral down and go into a dark hole.
What ifs and the woulda, coulda, shouldas are horrible.
You cannot change that, right? And I have to catch myself really early on in those thoughts, because I can't change it. I can't go back and change anything, but what can I change going forward? Can I say something to someone that's going to change their life, that's going to make them feel they're valued and see their value, and to realize I can stay one more day? And then having those honest conversations. It took a while for my husband and I to finally have that conversation. It got to the point where, he was practically catatonic on the couch, and not even realizing that he had gotten to that point where, I told him, you're spending 1/3 of your day at work, the other third in bed, and the other third of your life is on this couch. Like, it was like he was reliving that PTSD he had when he came back from Afghanistan. Where you're physically there, but there's nobody home, right? And I'm like, we can't do this. And so he was finally willing to go get some help and be able to at least find some meaning and remove the blame that he had been putting on himself for Christian's death.
And as you said that, I think one of the tough things is grief is a complex thing. Not only is it complex, but everybody is maybe not on that same step of grief at the same time. And I've heard parents say that how hard it was to be in a really bad spot one day and just really having a heavy day and come home and the spouse seems to be doing okay, and how that was so hard. And how could you be having a good day when things are, this is where we're at, and grief, it doesn't have a timetable that everybody's going to be step for step, in formation. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, and I look at our grief in our family. All of us have had different levels of grief. It all depends on your relationship with the person. How close were you? It's not a time thing. It's the depth of the relationship and your experiences earlier. I think because of my experiences that I'd gone through in my life, specifically one of them being with the loss of my father, I was able to process a lot of that a lot faster, and I also felt that I had a purpose. Finally, there was something that I could latch onto that I could move forward with. That's how I moved through a lot of those stages pretty quickly. Not to say that, months 4 to 6 got really heavy and hard, and at other times, but because I feel my son so close to me when I'm sharing his story. Sharing his story is what has allowed me to process not only through my son's grief, but finally to talk about my father's suicide.
Yeah.
And that's what's allowed me to heal. Whereas with my husband, it's been much more difficult for him. 18 months later, he has not read my book. It's not something that he can do right now. He just has to put all of those emotions in a box and lock that up and just keep it in that box, because he doesn't think that he can cope with life if that box gets opened.
And he'll get there.
Yeah, eventually, he's doing so much better. And just different things in life that has helped him move forward. Within just a very few weeks and then months with our family, I felt not only had I lost my son, but I was losing every member of my family, because they were going off in their own, grieving their own ways. 6 months after my son passed, it was his birthday, on his birthday anniversary, and I wanted to do something. Let's get together, let's remember him, and they weren't having anything to do with it. It was still very fresh. They all wanted to go and grieve in their own ways. And so what I had to do is allow them their time to grieve, because I'm over here going, hey, I'm processed. Let's move forward. Let's have a plan. Let's do something about this. Let's, go change the world. And they're over in their space going, I'm not ready.
Yeah.
And so we all had to allow each other, wherever we were in the process, we had to allow that. And like you said, it can be hard.
Yeah. And you wished everybody could be in step, but it just doesn't work that way.
And in some ways that's good, because then if one is having a really hard time, the other person can lift. Yeah. And I think it's so important not to think that you're isolating or you're the only one feeling that way, because they probably are feeling the same way. They're just processing it differently, and it's so important to just be open and honest. I'm having a rough day.
Yeah.
It's not a weakness to say that.
Do you remember the first time you smiled and laughed after your son's suicide?
And it almost felt like a betrayal to be able to smile again, right? That almost felt just too heavy. It took several days. I want to say probably a week or something. And to have some of our neighbors who had known our son, his whole life, that we were really close with, a couple of them came over and we just talked about memories. And that helps me. Talking about my son honors him, because then he's still here. And just to talk about the funny, quirky, crazy things that he would do. He was so crazy, that he would do explosions. He was always making like strange things. I came home one day and pulled into the garage. The kid's 16. He's hooking up a homemade flamethrower to the propane tank.
That's safe, right?
I'm surprised, he didn't blow up the house. There were explosions at night in the backyard. My husband would shake the house. He set off a rocket in our bedroom when he was 9 years old. So, these are things that he would text the neighborhood boys, hey, I'm making a homemade bomb. You should come over. And their mom texts me, he's like, Christian says he's making this bomb. Should I be concerned? I'm like, yes, you should be concerned. I'm concerned. So this boy was just crazy, right? He just had all these ideas. And to talk to other people who knew him, that brings me joy.
Yeah. Sounds like an amazing kid. So what's your favorite memory of your son? If you had to pick one.
Okay, so you caught me off guard. I remember the picture that started me crying. I couldn't cry when I thought about the man, the 19-year-old.
Yeah.
But the picture of him when he was 6 years old, he's got his cute, funny grin on his face, and he's holding this rat, Scabbers. And we have a whole story about Scabbers, because Scabbers would get lost, and then eventually 6 months later or something, Scabbers would get found again in our family, and my son just loved Scabbers. When my husband came home from deployment, he was home for his 2 weeks, and my son was 7 at the time. His heart was broken that his dad had to go, and he was so concerned that his dad might not make it back from the war that the night before he left, my son put Scabbers, buried him deep in my husband's duffel bag. Next couple days, my husband's traveling. He gets to Afghanistan. And he dumps out his duffel bag, and there's Scabbers. And so he calls home, and he's like, son, why did you put Scabbers in there? And he said, Dad, Scabbers always comes back, and I want you to come back too.
That's awesome.
My husband put Scabbers in my son's coffin. And that's our story about Scabbers. He always comes back. We know he'll come back.
Yeah, that's right. And nothing's changed. It's just part of his journey. Yeah. And he's okay.
Yeah.
He's good where he's at. You find peace in that?
Yes, very much. I am quite certain that he's helping other people who are struggling with suicide ideation. He's trying to help them and helping them try to overcome those thoughts. So he's just on a different mission.
Yeah, totally. For sure. Well, if Christian was sitting here today, what would you say to him?
Son, I love you. I love you for just who you are. Everything about you is perfect.
Yeah. He knows that now. He knows that now. Well, I am so happy that you came out and were willing to drive out here tonight and hang out with me. I know that your story helps people that have either been through it or, have lost somebody dear to them and somebody that they care about. It's a hard deal. It's not a fun space to be in. No. But what you're doing, I think it shows your strength because, like you said, a few years back, would you ever have imagined that you'd be where you are?
Never.
But the strength came in the fact that you knew you needed to change to do it, and you're willing to. How many of us freeze up and say, you know what, I'm not doing it? So I admire that about you. I think that's amazing what you've done. Tell everybody, when is the book coming out?
So it's hopefully coming out in November. I thought the hard part was writing the book, and I've since found out that no, that's just the beginning. So the plan is for it to be out in November, and they can find it. My website is larkdeangalley.com, but there is a link there for the book that if you want to learn more about the story and just to get updates, that's where it will be. So, and I'm sure I'll tell you when it comes out.
Awesome, and I'll share it for
Okay.
sure. So if people want to get in touch with you, larkdeangalley.com.
Yes.
And you're on social media as well.
Yes,
They can find you there. And you do speaking engagements.
I am happy to talk about this. I will go wherever, whenever. I've dedicated my life to this. It became very apparent early on when my son passed away that nothing else really mattered about what was going on in my life. It was just getting this message out and helping people.
Well, and you're going to touch thousands and thousands, and that's the important thing. Mm-hmm. There are so many people that are in a spot and just don't know where to go with it.
Right. And I look at my story and it's like, this could be a parent who's struggling in their relationship with their child.
Oh, yeah.
What can they do to make it a better relationship? Yeah. Maybe this is someone who has lost someone, maybe not from suicide, but they've lost and they're grieving. And how do they find meaning to go forward?
Yeah.
Just so many different ways that we can look at this story and say, find something that matters to you.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Well, if any of you are listening to this and you feel that this message would be important for somebody or you've had somebody on your mind, please share this. Share the podcast. Share it with somebody that you think it would touch. And that's the only way we get these messages out to the right people. And you play a very important part in it. If you've heard something that has touched you, please share it. If you're in a spot where you're feeling like your life doesn't matter and that nobody would notice if you were gone, we need you here. We need all of us here. Like you said, if we leave too soon, there's somebody that's going to miss what we were going to bring to them. And so please find somebody that you trust, talk to them, tell them where you're at. You'd be surprised how many people are in your corner. If you just make it known what you're going through, don't isolate. Let people know. Find that person you trust. And if you don't feel like you have that person, reach out and call the Lifeline. Call 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255. There will be somebody that will answer that call that has some suggestions and has ways to help. So reach out. Don't keep those thoughts deep inside. Don't keep them hidden. Get them out in the open, because that's how we heal. That's how we move forward. And again, I appreciate you guys coming back week after week and being willing to sit through an hour. And it says a lot about you when you're willing to take that time out of your week. There's so many other things we could be doing, and an hour is a commitment. And I appreciate watching those numbers every week, knowing that they're moving up and there's more people that are paying attention to what we're doing. And I am so grateful for you guys that you don't even have an idea. If you've got suggestions for me, maybe somebody you'd like to see featured on the podcast, comments, suggestions, anything, feel free to call me at 435-277-0235 or reach out to me by email at lifesworthlivingfoundation@gmail.com. Again, you're welcome to follow the foundation on any of the social media platforms at Life's Worth Living Foundation. See what we're doing. The podcast is only one portion of it. There's a lot of other things going on, so feel free to check us out on there and stay connected with us. We're so grateful for GTM Builders always making this possible and allowing us a quiet place where we can visit and record these podcasts in their beautiful model home. If you're thinking about building, check them out at gtmbuilders.com or visit one of their model homes in the Tooele Valley. Tonight's episode, again, was brought to you by A. Warner Homes Real Estate. If you're in the market for thinking about buying or selling, reach out to them at 801-867-5078. And until next week, we'll see you again. Thank you. Take care.